All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know some people might be coming in as we are getting started, but first off, you got a little notification that this is being recorded. So if you do have to leave for some reason, you can always catch this on the River Management Society YouTube channel. And but I'd like to officially welcome everyone for joining us today for Intro to Wild and Scenic River Management. My name is Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society, located in Southern Oregon, and I'm going to be helping facilitate today's meeting. Just real quick, for those who might not be as familiar with River Management Society, I just want to let you know that we're a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support professionals who study, protect, and manage North America's rivers. And we do this by developing and hosting training workshops, such as this, information sharing events, and really we're working to enable people who work on and around or in rivers to learn, meet experts, network with each other, connect with each other, learn from each other. We're also the home we're the home of the River Training Center, but we're also the home of the National Rivers Project and the River Studies and Leadership Certificate. And you can learn more about all these things, as well as some of the benefits to becoming a member on our website at river-management.org. So we'd love to know who's joining us here today. We're going to do some introductions of, well, you already heard from me, but I'm going to have Tanji Akasi-Otu and Nancy Taylor, who are joining us today and helping instruct this workshop, have them do some introductions, but also all of you, feel free to open up your chat box there and let us know who you are, where you're at, and maybe why you're joining today. And while you're all doing that, I'm going to pass it over to Tanji and then Nancy to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Angie. Hi, everybody. I'm Tanji Casiotu, and I work with the Forest Service. I work with the Washington office staff, so I'm located in Northern Virginia, and I work with the Wilderness and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Program as a specialist. So I work around the program in a number of ways, but typically providing technical support or brainstorming new strategies for management or planning with all of the folks in the field. And yeah, I've actually worked with Angie on a few separate occasions. And so RMS does a lot of heavy lifting and education and training. So happy to be here with you guys today, and I will pass it to Nancy.
Hi, everyone. I apologize for having a few technical difficulties. I had to switch to my tablet and I can't see the video view, so I'm hoping that you can see me here. My name is Nancy Taylor. I'm the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers Program Manager for the Pacific Northwest region of the Forest Service, and really excited to talk with you all today and looking forward to the next hour or so together. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanji and Nancy, and thanks for introducing yourself in the chat. Just to set some expectations for today, as well as the rest of this series, is we're trying to make this a little bit more participatory and active. And so we're really hoping to have some good participation today. Some of you might have attended previously. We've done this series. Well, we've done it. This will be our third year now. In the past, it's been a lot more presentation based, but today we're really trying to dig in a little bit more and have you all ask some questions and do some thinking through things. And so we have a couple different ways we're going to be communicating today. We're going to be we can use the chat here, as many of you have already done, where you're introducing yourselves. We're also going to be doing some breakout rooms today. You don't need to worry because we'll just send you right off and bring you right back. And so you won't have to do anything to go into those breakout rooms. And then also I wanted to share that we're going to have a collective document that we're going to be using throughout today with some prompts on it. I'm going to put a link into the chat, and I'll probably keep posting it in the chat to a shared Google document so that people who are joining can access it. But I just put a link in the chat now. You can click on that, open it up so you have it ready when we're doing some things today. And on that Google document, we're going to ask you to type in your thoughts. We're going to ask you to share things with us. If you accidentally delete something that you didn't mean to, Control Z is a great trick there. And then also, I like the idea of using the little asterisk to put next to things that you agree with, kind of as a virtual head nodding as we're going through today. Also, just a few session agreements, since we are looking for this active participation, is being here and trying to participate as much as possible. Really, that's going to help you all get the most out of this session. Also, just keeping in mind everyone's an expert. So I know that we've got some people in this room who have a lot of experience with wild and scenic rivers, some people who might not have as much. So let's share with each other. And while Nancy and Tangi and I are here to help instruct and facilitate, certainly we don't know everything. And so we'd love to hear from you as well. With that in mind, keeping your camera on if possible is nice, just to allow for that interaction, using that chat to connect with each other. And I like this one. It's okay to be raggedy. We're not perfect, and we're not going to try to pretend to be perfect. So we're going to be working through these exercises, and feel free to be raggedy yourself as we're thinking through things. And then lastly, what is true today might be different tomorrow. And I just think that's a nice thing to keep in mind as we're going through some of these. So, and then lastly, our purpose today, our goal is to have you identify the main components of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and then know how to leverage resources and a network of knowledge to find answers and solutions to things that you're working through. A couple different objectives are to learn some wild and scenic river definitions, to learn about and where to find resources and more info, and build a network from this group to share real management examples and hopefully connections that you can use in the future as well. And then also develop some critical questions about the application of the Act. And Tangi, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to the objectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall we're hopeful in the short amount of time we have today that people can walk away with a few fundamentals, because there's been enough repetition and discussion. But I think that the Act really begins to have meaning when you're able to consider different scenarios and ask really, critical questions, meaning like, well, how would you define this in this scenario? Or how does it work, when you're collaborating with this group? And always just coming back to examining the intentions of the Act and how that fits within the wider realm of water resources and their management. So I think developing those questions comes through conversation with others. So I just encourage you to wrestle with things and pick things apart together.
Awesome. Thanks, Tangi. So while we, to start off, instead of just spewing a bunch of information about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, I think it would be great to think about what you already know about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and start thinking together, and maybe jot down in your notebook in front of you, how did you first hear about wild and scenic rivers? How do they interplay with your work? What do they mean to you? Now that you're getting some thoughts and some ideas, we are going to go into some breakout rooms, and we're going to go into these breakout rooms. I encourage you to all introduce yourselves and then share with each other what you already know about wild and scenic rivers. And then also, while you're doing that, feel free to go to that shared Google document that I put a link to in the chat And you can see there's a prompt. The very first prompt is, what do you already know about wild and scenic rivers? And you can start adding ideas there, discussing potentially what you see there as a group. So I'm going to go ahead and create some breakout rooms. And I will send everyone off right now. All right, giving it a few more seconds as people are coming back from the breakout rooms. All right, I think people are back from breakout rooms. So here again, I'm going to direct everyone to that shared Google document. And based on your conversations, maybe learn something new, or you discuss something. I'd love to see some thoughts on this document. And I'm going to, again, put it in the chat for anyone who needs access to it. You can click on that link in the chat and open it up on your own browser and be able to just type right in. Right now I'm sharing my screen, and so you can't type directly onto my screen, but you can open this in your browser. I see, like, there's lots of them. There's not enough of them. Any observations or thoughts that anyone would like to share, or anything that came up that you were discussing? Feel free to raise your hand and unmute, or you can put some comments in the chat as well. Or maybe there's something you disagree with. Anyone see something that they might disagree with? Well, cool. I see. Yeah, they have outstandingly remarkable values, aka ORVs. And we might get a little bit more into that terminology next. Protection of their free-flowing nature. Sister Act to the Wilderness Act. There are a lot of rivers utilized for recreation that are not protected enough, and goes beyond protection to enhancement. I'm curious if anyone wants to elaborate, or yeah, Rob, go ahead. You are muted, Rob. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I'll just share something. Repeat something I just shared with the folks in the breakout group, which is one of the I'm involved, and is he still on, or did he just drop out? I guess he's probably down the bottom. There are more people. Joe Trudeau and I and others are involved in as part of 30 by 30 efforts. And oh, there you are, Joe. 30 by 30 efforts in Arizona to push forward wild and scenic designation. And we're involved. Joe is really a leader in efforts to for a campaign to get wild and scenic designation for the Upper Verde River. But what I wanted to share right now is that one of the big questions that my boss had for me, he challenged me, saying, essentially asserting that wild and scenic designation did not bring a lot of value for conservation of endangered species. And of course, I work for Defenders of Wildlife, and we're all about protecting rare and endangered species in the US. And so there was So fortunately, I got, there's a wonderful guy, Mike Feibig with American Rivers, who's worked on campaigns for many, many years in many, many states. And he came and gave a presentation to our entire staff at Defenders of Wildlife on the many values of wild and scenic designation for wildlife conservation, including, just among other things, preventing dams going in and so on. And so Mike just mentioned there that one of the things we know is that they can be very helpful in wildlife conservation. So, and Joe, that of course immediately makes me think of the tension between fish barriers and wild and scenic designation that we've been wrestling with. I don't know if you want to say anything about that for folks.
I could, but I don't want to hijack Angie's plan. So I'll just leave it up to her.
I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it might be a nice segue into our next activity, which is kind of looking at some of these key terms and things outlined in the first two sections, at least, of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We were trying to keep it brief. I mean, if we'd really encourage everyone to go read the whole Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, but I'm going to put a link into the chat here. And I'm also going to put the link to the shared document again, just in case anyone's dropped off and it's come back on. But I'm going to ask you to open that Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and I will open it here just to show you what we're looking at here. And hopefully this is not totally new. You've seen this before, but if this is your first time, hey, this is great. So gonna take a little bit of time to look at section 1 and section 2, and that's really just the first 2 pages here. And this is I believe this is the abridged version. Or maybe it's not actually, but read through these first 2 sections. And as you can see on our shared document here, kind of going down to the second prompt, what are some of the key terms that are repeated? So maybe it is that free flow, thinking about fish barriers, thinking about protecting ORVs, or outstandingly remarkable values. What does that mean? What are some key terms that you've identified in the act that stand out, or that you see are repeated, or maybe you don't know what it means and you're curious to know exactly what it means? So feel free to go ahead and start looking through and typing those in. And Nancy, if you had anything to add, I feel like I'm kind of hijacked that prompt from you, but I saw a nice little segue.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I agree. Nothing to add. Thanks, Angie.
So giving you a few minutes to think here. Gonna go back to our shared document. Still seeing some reading faces, so give you a little more time. So as people are starting to finish reading through, I can see right now we've already got some terms that those who are familiar with wild and scenic rivers have certainly seen before, but we've got free flowing, protect, scenic, recreational, wild, accessibility, water quality, outstandingly remarkable. Yeah, keep adding as you're finding new terms. And I think something that's super helpful, at least to me, and we all have different learning styles, but is almost creating like a little pocket dictionary of wild and scenic river terms that we're often referring to back in more than once, and also to help me have an idea of what do these terms mean in this context. As someone mentioned earlier, they pointed out that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is kind of a sister act to the Wilderness Act, yet wilderness and wild rivers have very different meanings. So now that we've got some terms on here, I think it'd be great if we could give it a shot at like group defining and trying to figure out some definitions for these terms. And I really encourage you to look through the act. There might be spots within the act that do define these. And so if anyone also wants to speak out loud to define any of these, you can do that as well. Or if anyone has any questions or something that they're like, well, I know it means this, but I've used it differently in a different context. Does anyone want to speak to the differences between wild, scenic, and recreational designation of a river? Yeah, Monica.
Well, I can cheat and I can read. So the wild river areas are those rivers or sections of rivers that are free of impoundments and generally inaccessible except by trail, with watersheds or shorelines essentially primitive and waters unpolluted. These represent the vestiges of primitive America.
Where'd you find that?
It is in section 2. 221.
Let me, yeah, I didn't write the right. What about some of these other, does anyone, yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I'm like kind of an old hand, so I would offer a question as to how are those three areas determined on a given river. So who makes the determination that it's wild or scenic or recreational? And the main way I know that that occurs is during the study process. So when a river is going to be designated, it's best that it be studied first, and the study team determines what areas would be wild, and there's detailed criteria and a point system for that. So anyway, just offer a little background there.
Yeah, and I think that even brings up a couple more terms, you know, like eligible or eligibility and suitability, or suitable rivers. Macy, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you. I cannot figure that out for a second. I was going to speak on, I was like writing down the little definitions for myself because I was wondering too. And I thought it was interesting because I just still baby river guide. I've only done it for a few seasons, but it's funny because the Arkansas River is definitely just like a recreational river. Like there's infrastructure built in to load your boats, you know, from the top all the way down to the bottom, like not necessarily a ramp, but like a boat for inflatable rafts and stuff. Whereas if you went to like a wild river, you would have to probably, you know, pack in or hike in with all your stuff. You're not getting that like commercial access. So I thought that was interesting that they have those, you know, split up by protecting them recreationally, whether that be for just like the pure enjoyment of recreation or profit or whatnot.
Does anyone else want to speak to that? And I think an important distinction to make is that there are these three types of river classification. We've got wild, scenic, and recreational. But then we've also got our outstandingly remarkable values. And you can have a recreational ORV, but that does not mean that the stretch is necessarily classified as recreational. Or you can have scenery as an outstandingly remarkable value, but it does not mean that the river is necessarily a scenic designated stretch. Monica, did you have something to add?
Yeah, from my understanding, wild, scenic versus recreational is more about the access to the river when it was designated versus what the river is used for. So like, for example, a wild area that's inaccessible except by trail. And then a scenic area, it's still largely primitive and shorelines are largely undeveloped, but in some places it has roads. And then recreational, usually there's development along the shoreline, and there might be a railroad or a road along the shoreline.
Yeah. Thanks for citing that, making that distinction. Well, this activity was really meant to start thinking about some of these terms and what do they mean, and also kind of clearing some misconceptions around the different terms. You can take and download this and make your own personal little wild and scenic river dictionary or reference guide, or copy and paste it and put it into your own document. This is meant to be helpful for you as you're working on with around in wild and scenic rivers. Before we move on to the next activity, well, I guess next part of the session, did anyone want to add anything else about any of these terms or make any points or clarifications? Fred, is your hand up or are you just applauding us?
Yeah, my hand's up. I want to point out that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act occurred in 1968, and the Clean Water Act occurred later in 72. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the Clean Water Act. based from the timing. And there's the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is dated in some other areas as well.
It's a good point to make. All right. Well, I think we're gonna move on, and I'm gonna pass it over to Nancy because I've been chatting a lot. So go ahead, Nancy.
Well, thanks for leading us through that, Angie, and do a quick sound check. Everything sound okay?
Yep.
Great. Hopefully we got that part ironed out. So yeah, thanks everybody. I'm gonna go through a few slides and I'll just give it a sec. If Angie, you can, at least I'm not seeing the slides on my screen right now. There we go. Thank you. So I'll start off just by asking this question. And if you want to just either speak up, take yourself off mute, or if you want to put it in the chat. And who do you think is responsible for protecting and enhancing rivers and the values in those rivers? And I'll give just a minute here for folks to type that in, or speak up, like I say. You don't even need to raise your hand. If you just want to pop off mute, feel free to do that.
Are you asking with respect to the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, or are you asking
Yes.
cross-sectionally about a lot of other acts?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, in the context of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Sorry, should have specified that. And we'll talk about it here in a minute. We just wanted to get folks, and I can't see the chat very well, Angie, so maybe you could help me out with that.
Yeah, I see. We got the managing agency, federal managing agency, ideally everyone, all of us. Bud mentioned anti-degradation statutes were enacted in 1968, water quality, and then subsumed by the Clean Water Act. And yeah.
Yeah, I really like the answer. We'll talk about this a little bit more here in the next slide, but I really like the answer, all of us. That's great. And it sounded like that came up a couple of times. Well, let's go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the rivers that have been added to the National Wild and Scenic River System by acts of Congress are protected and administered by the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Interior. And so within these departments, the land managing agencies that you can see on the slide here are responsible for the administration of these wild and scenic rivers. And so there's another, in addition to that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the agencies in a second, there's a subset of the national system called partnership rivers. And I'm just going to say right away that I'm not at all an expert on that. And they're administered by the National Park Service, and this is in partnership with adjacent communities and state governments. And there's going to be a webinar in February that focuses on the partnership rivers. Yeah, and thanks for putting that in the chat too, Angie. So the experts will be there to talk about that. And so I wanted to highlight that there's these partnership rivers are also an important piece of how certain rivers are managed. So then another way that rivers are managed too is by states. And in section 2AII of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, there's rivers that are designated in the national system that's basically in addition to the federal agencies. And this is when rivers are brought forward by states by an act of the legislature and then brought forward by the governor to the Secretary of Interior. And then again, I am not an expert on these types of rivers either, but there are many people who are, and these are brought forward and then they're managed by the states. So to summarize, when we're talking about congressionally designated wild and scenic rivers, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Secretary of Interior, And the Forest Service, under the Secretary of Agriculture, manage these rivers. But then we have these others, the partnership rivers and the 2AII, or those managed by the states as well. And so the responsibility of the agencies that are in charge of these rivers, we need to ensure that management actions align with protection and enhancement of river values. And if we go to the next slide, please. So that's our next focus here, is protecting and enhancing river values. And what are those river values? So we talked a few minutes ago about the words that we see in the Act and that come up more than once in several places in the Act. And these are key concepts that guide agency management and stewardship of wild and scenic rivers. So the congressional intent of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, as it's expressed in sections 1B and 10A of the Act, is to protect and enhance the threefold purpose for which rivers are added to the national system. And so these three things together are free-flowing water, water quality, and then outstandingly remarkable values. Also, you'll hear them called ORVs, and we've talked about those some in the last few minutes. So all of these together are referred to as river values. So in the next 3 slides, we'll go into a little bit more detail to talk about what each of these mean. And next slide, please. So, excuse me, preserving free-flowing condition, it's identified as a principal purpose of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act in section 1B. And it's defined in section 16B in part as, and I'm just going to read this because I think the language that's in the Act is really important here, is existing or flowing in natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modification of the waterway. And an important point that's also in the Act, which I'll read here in a minute, is that rivers with low dams, diversion works, and other minor structures are not precluded from addition to the national system or designation. But the important point is that so long as such future proposals of these types of structures are not authorized. So the language from the Act is that provided that this shall not be construed to authorize, intend, or encourage future construction of such structures within components of the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. So they may be there when the river is designated, but they're not allowed to be added to the river later after designation. Next slide, please. So water quality is also identified specifically in section 1B of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And this is the second river value and the second purpose of the Act. And so water quality under the protect and enhance mandate can really be, there can be a lot of different ways that this can be addressed and looked at. It depends a lot on the conditions that are exist in the river, and they can be very unique. There can be, monitoring. There can be really focusing on enhancing water quality, protecting what's already there. I mean, looking at these pictures, if that clear water is of high water quality, then what we want to do is protect that and keep that at the high level, high bar that it is when the river is designated. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So then the third river value, and we've talked about these a little bit, are outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs. And so protecting these outstandingly remarkable values for present and future generations is directed through the language of section 1B as well. And it lists the potential outstandingly remarkable values that may be reasons for rivers that are added to the system. And the ones that are listed are scenic, recreational, geologic, fish, wildlife, historic, cultural, or other similar values. So some really quickly, some interesting ones that have come up in some river planning processes are something like ecology, where are there components that are specific to that river that really make up a really unique and rare type of ecosystem? And is it worth calling out that ecology for that river as an outstandingly remarkable value? Another one that's had a lot of interesting discussion is dark skies. Is that the other, is that another outstandingly remarkable value that exists that is dependent on that river. And so that's the key point about outstandingly remarkable values, which you can really gather from the name of them, is that they're very, very special, and they have to meet a really high bar of being unique, rare, and exemplary when they're that it's really significant when it's compared with similar values from other rivers in a regional, sort of local geographic, or even on a national scale. They need to be river dependent, and they owe their location or existence to the presence of the river. And so on this slide, just as some examples, these photos, the first one is botanical, that it's something very unique and rare type of plant that is dependent on that river and that exists there, and it is a very rare and unique feature of it. Wildlife, showing the raptor here, that can be historical, that Whiskey Creek Cabin sign there. And then we talked about recreational a few minutes ago, and recreational values can be outstandingly remarkable as well. So now I'll turn it over to Tanji, and she's going to talk about roles and responsibility of others in river management. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy. And yeah, now we're going to turn towards, kind of coming back to the first question about who's responsible for management. A few folks mentioned that there's probably more folks involved in that process than just the managing agency. And so the Act does actually provide encouragement for collaboration, and then clarifies jurisdiction and authorities within that. And since rivers are so dynamic and they flow across many landscapes and multiple jurisdictions, it's important to be able to take a look at the guidance that the Act provides on how to collaborate with different entities so that rights are retained and that management is consistent with protecting the values of the river. And so within the Act, there's encouragement and direction to partner with state and local agencies. There's direction to protect river values in collaboration with others. And it also gives authority to plan and protect river resources. So we can dive right into some of the sections that cover this topic of collaboration. So let's start with the federal and state partnerships. In this case, the Act cites that federal agencies can enter into written cooperative agreements with the states. And in particular, they are encouraged directly to cooperate within the planning process and in the administration of the rivers. And this can be found in Section 10 of the Act. And a good example of some of the outcomes of that collaboration, particularly on the planning end of things, would be the North Umpqua Federal State Joint Wild and Scenic River. And so they developed a management plan together because in this case, Oregon has some legislation called the Oregon Scenic Waterway Act. And since they have a state scenic waterway program, implying that they have some technical expertise or other resources to assist in that management, they were able to reserve an entire chapter in the management plan as to how the state of Oregon would be involved in administering that river as well. So the Act also authorizes collaboration with other groups, including the states, but other groups like landowners, private organizations, and individuals to plan, protect, and manage river resources through a partnership relationship. And in fact, the Act does indicate that the federal agencies shall assist, advise, and cooperate with these groups for the planning and protection, and that the way that they can contribute to that relationship is through limited financial or other types of technical assistance to encourage participation and engagement from all of these groups. And this applies to activities and jurisdiction within and proximate to designated rivers. And some examples and outcomes of those types of relationships include like tree planting could be an outcome if for example, there was a cottonwood planting project that was done near the Missouri Wild and Scenic River in Montana with the county. There's also like an invasive species removal project that was done in Arizona in collaboration with a non-governmental organization. And then another project outcome could be something like installation of interpretive signage that could be done in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce. And so it really highlights the resources, insight, technical expertise, and finances that are available across all these different entities to carry out projects to enhance and protect the rivers. So when it comes to other federal level agencies, the Act also covers what this collaboration looks like and seeks to clarify some jurisdiction. And so essentially the heads of other federal departments and agencies that have jurisdiction over lands which are bordered or near rivers included in the Wild and Scenic Rivers system actually shall take action to respect the management policies that are associated with Wild and Scenic Rivers. And so this type of collaboration can be challenging because there's such a complex web of priorities of these different agencies, but the Act addresses that these conversations and coordination needs to happen so that the other federal agencies that have responsibilities to manage resources on or near Wild and Scenic Rivers are in compliance with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act as well. And so I'll actually provide an example of that one, which is comes up pretty often. And this is in regards to responsibilities of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And Angie, you can advance the slide as well if you'd like. And the Army Corps of Engineers has responsibilities that occur in and around Wild and Scenic Rivers because they issue permits for in-water work across waters of the U.S. So in order to clarify their authority to issue those permits, this section of the Act 12A assigns them responsibility as a federal agency to respect the management of Wild and Scenic Rivers. And in this case, because the way that the Act provides protection to rivers from proposed water resource projects is that they be assessed under the standards outlined in the Act. So basically, an example of how this type of coordination is occurring is that there is an interagency council of Wild and Scenic River managers and experts, and they work together to develop white papers on different topics within the Act. And so in this topic particular, there actually is a roles and responsibilities of other federal agencies white paper. And so it's been discussed in length in coordination with a variety of agencies, and there's points of contact to clarify legal authorities. And really this part of the Act relies on good relationships because it's important to be updated with the changing priorities and laws that influence activities of other agencies. Now, another example of responsibilities of other federal agencies is the specific call out towards the EPA. And so in Section 12C, this is where the Act encourages the federal managing agency to collaborate with the Environmental Protection Agency to protect water quality. And so in this case, collaboration can occur with a state administrator or directly with the EPA for the appropriate state water pollution control agency to eliminate or diminish pollution of waters of the area. And so it really requires active participation because monitoring is a huge challenge for a lot of these rivers, and coming up with an effective plan to anticipate other impacts to water quality into the future really requires that continual relationship building and planning around this topic because capacity can be pretty low on this portion of the Act. And one example of where this collaboration is happening is that a joint federal state water quality plan was actually developed on the Upper Deschutes Wild and Scenic River. And this is where they outlined a plan to facilitate consistent data collection and then a series of coordinated actions to address those water quality issues for that river. So lastly, I'll just address the last section that just reiterates that although there are partnership opportunities and collaboration is encouraged, the states still retain their jurisdiction and responsibilities. And in particular, often this is in regards to fish and wildlife regulations, which has been a topic of conversation that was brought up here earlier. And so although sometimes we can look at the act as river managers and be like, okay, great, we have a lot of resources. We also have to remember to be innovative problem solvers, to understand how to retain the rights and priorities of the state in managing the resources that they have jurisdiction over. So that's addressed in the act as well. So with that, I can open it up to questions and then hand it back to Angie as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Hey, so regarding the two sections that you just described, one of them with the agreements with states, and then another one that would be like agreements with citizens or nonprofits or other local entities. Would those have to be defined in the legislation in order for them to be initiated, or is that something that partner agencies, governments, or organizations could do after a river's already designated?
I believe it's something that can occur after designation, and each agency has different requirements for what the appropriate agreement is in order to carry out that kind of work or partnership. But yes, it can occur after designation.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions or things people would like to add? Or yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, sorry, I have another question, but regarding the last example you gave from section 12, describing the interaction with the EPA and state water quality laws. So part of the EPA's implementation of the Clean Water Act, they delegate to the states the authority to create outstanding national resource waters, which are waters of exceptional streams with exceptional water quality. So there seems like there's a fair bit of overlap there, and this might be like the way water quality is described in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is very vague. It's just, like a very open-ended term, but it seems like this might be an inroad to maybe like connect the Clean Water Act's outstanding national resource water direction with the Wild Scenic Rivers Act. So I'm just wondering if you've ever seen anyone try to make that connection, or just if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because certainly the way we sort of like define and assess the rivers kind of changes over time during the planning process. And so I've never done like a crosswalk of the terminology associated with the two myself, but oftentimes these are the things that interdisciplinary planning teams try to look at to contribute in the eligibility process, like what are there, or certainly the suitability process as well, in regards to the actual manageability of the rivers into the future, like if they have been included or cited as being part of that standard, or they have other infrastructures of management or have been noted as exemplary examples of certain types of river values that usually contribute. So I think that's where I see the interaction. I'd be interested to hear from other folks in the group if that's specifically been cited in their assessment of rivers before. But I'll hand it over to Fred. I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm involved with the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Coalition. I'm on the leadership team, and that's an issue that we've been working on and we continue to work on with, you know, pretty good intensity. And my understanding is that the states are the ones that establish the designated uses. So the states would be the entity that could determine an outstanding national resource water. And we think that in our work with this is that a lot of the states don't know that they can do that. And so we're trying to work with the EPA to do more outreach to the states to let them know that, yeah, you know, if you have wild and scenic rivers, you can create the outstanding national resource waters anti-degradation designation for those. But it's a good question, and it's an issue that's like in play now to encourage more work on that.
Yeah, thanks, Fred.
I think the EPA still has to approve the state's listing of designated uses for rivers within the state. They still have some authority over the state because they could, for instance, not accept their plan and impose one. But then on the other hand, that's rarely done. Asking for a fight.
Any other comments or thoughts to share? Questions? All right, I'm not seeing anything. So I'm just going to encourage everyone to go back to that shared document. And do you have anything new to add to those lists after some of the stuff we just discussed? And encourage you to fill that in. That's, again, this is for your value, for you to refer back to. You can add more about, like, well, now what do you know about wild and scenic rivers, or any other terms that we might have discussed that you're like, hey, I am not sure what that means. I want to come back to that later. Rob, go ahead.
Thank you. I just need a little bit more clarification on the last point that was brought up. Is the idea that the state, when they're designating or have designated outstanding waters, and they have designated pollutant acceptable pollutant levels, that those are then somehow can be incorporated in the wild and scenic in a wild and scenic ORV? Is that what you guys were saying? I didn't really follow the connection between those two. Sorry.
I can try and speak to that. So essentially, from my understanding, hopefully this isn't too broad, that essentially if water quality was identified as a potential value of a river segment, and there was interest in designating that segment, you could work in collaboration with the state to make a plan for the monitoring and management of the water quality. And if utilizing some of the standards from the state would help to inform a really robust standard and plan, it could be included in that way through the planning process. Does that add any clarity?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm glad you spoke up, Rob. Again, if anyone has any other questions or points of clarification throughout this whole session or this whole series, please speak up, because this is a great network of people to do it with, and get some answers, hopefully. All right, well, this next activity, I'm going to kind of we're not going to take too long on it because we don't have that much time left, but we know that there's always lots of questions about wild and scenic rivers, and you know, even if you've been working with them for a while, there's things that come up. So it's nice to be able to know some other resources and places to go to look for answers, and just wanted to make sure that everyone is familiar and has at least visited rivers.gov, which is the website that's from the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council, and there's a ton of great resources. And so we're just going to take no more than 10 minutes here to do a short activity. And I was thinking of putting us back into some breakout groups, just that way to allow for some teamwork and some help if people need it, or if you want to point out some more things on the website that you find valuable or questions you might have, you have an opportunity to ask those. But first, I'm going to give a quick demo. So the first thing is I'm going to ask you to go to rivers.gov, and once you come up here, well, and I guess I do want to let you know that there is a redesign of this website that's being developed. It's not going to go live probably until this summer. So I can't speak to, you know, what is true today might be different tomorrow as far as where to find these resources. But at least in the meantime, until we have to figure out the new design, want to point everyone here. So first go to rivers.gov, and then here on the far left-hand side, the first thing you see is the national system. And then the first one down are designated rivers. And for the purposes of this activity, I'm going to ask you to come to this map and choose any wild and scenic river that you're feeling today. Maybe it's one that you're working with. Maybe it's your favorite one to visit. Maybe it's one you have no idea about. So today, thinking about the River Management Symposium that's coming up next month in Texas. So I'm going to click Texas and let it load here. It's going to bring up a map, zoom into Texas, point out, oh, look, and then as well as list down below the map any wild and scenic rivers in that state. Not every state has a wild and scenic river yet. But here we've got the Rio Grande. You can see it here on the southern border. If I click on that map, it's going to bring up who's the responsible agency for managing this wild and scenic river. Maybe it'll provide me with some river values of what the river is being managed and managed for. And so say I click on the Rio Grande. Also down here, I'm going to find, okay, it's Big Bend National Park who's managing this. The different mileages of the wild and scenic sections. It looks like this one doesn't have a recreational stretch. And then down here, I see some related links. And these might be documents that are helping with the management of the rivers. So like here we've got the Rio Grande River Management Plan. I could pull that up and look through that to find some of the river values. As you're looking around and doing this, you might notice that some rivers might not have a river management plan, or some rivers might have an old river management plan. Some might have a very new river management plan. So I encourage you to go and take a look at some of the different rivers. And again, that's going to rivers.gov. On the left-hand side, the national system, and then designated rivers to start. So I'm going to give everyone about 5 minutes to go through this, help each other out in your small groups. If you have any notes about river management plans that you want to include, and then also if you have any extra time, what are some other resources that you find useful on rivers.gov if you're familiar with the website, or if you're not familiar with the website, I encourage you to poke around and look and see what is available there. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to recreate these breakout rooms and send you off, and it'll only be for a few minutes. So this will be a quick one. All right, welcome back everyone. And Tangi and Nancy, I apologize for putting you both in a breakout room together. I just did it randomly, and after I realized, I was like, well, too late, but and I
That's right,
realized
we had
uh, and I realized that was a really short amount of time to do the activity, but I encourage you all to go, if you're not familiar with rivers.gov, to go check it out, go look up a couple different rivers and see what some of the differences are. Can you find the river values? What are the management plans look like? Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, I just wanted to report out from our room that we got onto an issue of significant importance, and that is the datedness of river management plans, and that a lot of the river management plans are very old and were made back in days when there wasn't nearly the GIS data and the remote sensing data and the mapping that's available now. So there is a big need, I think, nationally to update management plans.
Jody, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just had a question. And hopefully one other person doesn't know this too. I have boated a bunch of these rivers before, but I'm kind of new to the whole conservation side of them. Can a river only have one of the 3 designations? Because I always hear about, it's a wild and scenic river, but is it because certain sections can only be one thing, or can they be 2 things or 3 things, or only one?
That's a great question. Oh,
Yeah, I'm curious, are you referring to the classification of the river?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so when a river is designated during the planning process, they do designate different sections and segments of the river under different classifications. So if you find you're in a really remote canyon and then, a
Okay.
couple miles later you pass under a highway bridge, that they will have been noted in the mapping and in the management plan of the river that those segments would be managed slightly differently.
Okay, thanks, Sanjay. It was just trying to, understand the website, and was just wondering if there was any overlap there or if it's actually different distinctions. And that's kind of more what it seemed like. So thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've even seen it where there's like a wild stretch and then the next part is not doesn't have necessarily a designation, and then it's like a recreational stretch. So they're not always like directly bordering each other too. So. Well, the last little prompt on our shared document here is just what are some other resources that you've found that might be useful, and feel free to share here. Like Fred had mentioned the Wild and Scenic Rivers Coalition. They're a great resource. Tangi also included in the chat a council paper on state water quality in wild and scenic rivers. So if you have anything else to share, I encourage you to check it out. Also, when you're here on the website, the 3rd tab over, there's resources listed. And then here under publications, the 4th tab, you'll get all of the Interagency Council's technical white papers here. And a lot of really good guidance as far as managing wild and scenic rivers, studying wild and scenic rivers, and some of the more kind of deeper type topics. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
Oh, and then if I could just give a tiny shout out to the 50th anniversary tab, where there was a huge effort to provide a lot of interpretive materials in different languages and for different audiences. So anybody who's on the sort of like advocacy side, who wants to see sort of the storytelling lens and like, okay, what are the actual outcomes of designation type of things? There's a lot of good communication resources in that tab too.
Thanks, Tangi. Good point. So we are about to close it out here, and I have one little last interactive activity for us, and I'm going to put another link, one last link here in the chat. And I'll pull it up on my shared screen here to kind of walk us all through it. So this activity is called Climber Cards. And here at the top, I've got a prompt, and it's asking you to select a card that represents your knowledge of wild and scenic river management. And so you can see there's a whole bunch of different things. There's no right or wrong answer, and this is all individual to you. Say, maybe I'm feeling like an octopus today. Like there's so many different things to know with the Wild and Scenic River Management, and I'm trying to keep it all together. So you can enter your name and why you chose this card. And this is just a fun way for us to reflect. So I'll give you all a minute or so to do so. And while you're doing that, I just want to remind everyone that we've got our February session on the third Wednesday of the month, like all of the sessions on the third Wednesday. And we're going to be discussing the partnership Wild and Scenic River approach. And yeah, once you've submitted, you should be able to go and see some of the other responses. I just think this is a fun way for us, for me as a facilitator, to kind of see where everyone's at. Also just a fun way for us to all reflect. So here's some of the responses that we've got coming in. I like it, Rob. I've been peeking in, but not fully in the room. Fred, yes, I agree. A lot to know and inner workings. And if anyone wants to explain why they chose their card out loud, you're welcome to do that. Lots of good viewpoints on the act. I try to keep an eye on it. Ooh, lots of doors today. Still feel I'm on the outside, just beginning to open the door. A lot of possibilities. Nice, Kelsey, I agree. This is all the beautiful and unique ways the act protects our beautiful rivers. So many doors to open with learning more. Yes, opening doors. Awesome. Well, we are at our time. I appreciate everyone's participation today. Again, this series is seeking to be a little bit more participatory than the ones we've done in the past. So we'd love to hear any feedback that you have for us. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Also, I'm hoping that people made some connections today and that you feel like you can start to draw upon each other as a network of people to reach out to as well when you have questions. So that's it for me. Thanks again. I don't know if Tangi and Nancy have any closing words for the group, but I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. I'm sticking my email in the resource sheet, so please reach out, even if you just have like something really interesting to talk about. I like learning from everybody. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Angie just said. Thanks so much for being here. And I always learn as I put in the climber cards. It's really enjoyed the format today and interacting with you all. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Tangi and Nancy. And I encourage everyone to check out our YouTube channel where I'm going to be posting this. I'll also be sending this out as well as a copy of the slides to everyone. So I'll be emailing that after I process the video later today. And I am putting in our YouTube link. I like and subscribe to stay up to date with the videos that we're putting on there. So thanks, everyone.